Good evening, everybody. Welcome in. You found yourself to the right place. And as folks are jumping in, you should all have access to the chat, but let's go ahead and test that to make sure. If you don't mind, maybe just telling everyone here, just saying hi and where you're calling in from tonight. That would be really great. So let's just make sure our chat function's working and go ahead and introduce yourself when you jump in here. All right, great. Chat's working. We've got some folks from Nevada, some from California. If you're just joining us, welcome everybody. Go ahead and, as we're kind of waiting for folks to pour in, go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat and where you're calling in from tonight. And then we're just going to get started, and we'll give it three minutes here, maybe a little less, and then we'll kick this off. All right. You know what? Actually, it looks like the numbers have slowed pouring in. It's like maybe people are ready to get started. So let's go ahead and do it. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the ACs. This is our final scheduled webinar for our series this year. We do these virtual events. Feels like about every month or two, and they're kind of our way of just communicating to both people that follow us and people who are maybe new to us, the work that we're doing in a landscape, and also I think for me, the joy in that is I get to bring experts in our field, partners that I work with, to the stage here to kind of share with you all the wisdom and knowledge that they pour into the work out here in the Amargosa. It's a special thing. So I'm really excited for tonight's webinar. We'll go ahead and I'm going to introduce our speakers. Of course, I'll start with myself. My name is Mason Bale. I am Executive Director of Amargosa Conservancy. We are the organization hosting tonight's webinar. We are a partner organization on these big restoration grants, in addition to other, of course, work that we do in the region. And I'm going to be kind of serving as tonight's MC, and it's my pleasure to first introduce Laurel Sebastian. Laurel works as a restoration ecologist and project manager for River Partners' Modesto, California office. She grew up exploring the varied ecosystems of the West before studying environmental science at Colorado College. And she did ecological field research and environmental education for nonprofits in Colorado, Washington, Alaska, and California before earning a master's degree from UC Davis's graduate group in ecology. And she's currently planning and implementing restoration projects along the Amargosa River, the San Joaquin River, and Bear Creek. So she's one of our presenters tonight. The other is my friend Chris McCready. And Chris serves as the American Bird Conservancy's Southwest Bird Recovery Manager. He's based in San Diego, where he lives with his wife and his daughter. And he obtained his bachelor's from the University of Michigan and headed west after graduation to work on Bell's Vireos in the New Mexico desert. Before joining ABC, Chris worked with Point Blue Conservation Science as its desert program lead for 15 years, implementing research projects that address a wide array of avian conservation issues. And he began working on the Amargosa River for Point Blue in 2005. He's fascinated by drought impacts on bird populations and the focus of his MSc research at University of Arizona. He spends much of his free time searching for bird nests. And I'll just say that, Chris was one person that I met with such a deep history in the Amargosa, one of the Amargosa's bird people. And just want to share that the American Bird Conservancy is the primary partner, the primary grantor on this grant that makes the work that you're going to hear about tonight possible. So we are exceedingly grateful to ABC and to Chris for working with us and other partner organizations to make this exciting work possible. And with that, with no further ado, let's going to go ahead and get started. One last piece of housekeeping is go ahead and drop your questions in the chat as we go along. I'll keep track of them. And at the end, we'll pose them to Chris and to Laurel. So feel free to do that at any time. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Laurel to take it away.
Yeah, I'll start just this first slide and then hand it off to Chris, so you'll hear a little bit more from me in the second half of this. But just as a brief overview, today we will be talking about this restoration grant that we've gotten to do restoration planning on the Amargosa River, and then also some of the fundamentals and general benefits of riparian restoration before moving in to some of the history of prior restoration efforts and how those inform our current restoration planning grant and the major project goals that we're hoping to achieve on the Amargosa River before wrapping up with our next steps and time for Q&A at the end.
Okay. With that, if you could advance, yeah, thanks, Laurel. So I'm Chris. So the name of our grant is Enhancing Biodiversity and Resilience in the Mojave Desert's Southern Amargosa Basin. And it's funded by the California Wildlife Conservation Board. And I just want to thank the California WCB again for believing in our project and for funding our work. Many of us have worked here for many, many, many years. And so it's a dream for us to get to do this and talk about it and think it through. And so it's just it's a thrill to do this, and I'm grateful. The organizations that work on this, River Partners and American Bird Conservancy and UC Davis and RU Incorporated and the Amargosa Conservancy and the California Botanic Garden. And the map here on the right, this shows you our project area. That sort of diagonal slash from upper left to lower right, that's the California-Nevada border. So we're in Eastern California on the very edge of it in the Mojave Desert, not that far west of Pahrump and Las Vegas. Next slide, please. And I'm going to turn my video off just because my internet connection has not been great. I don't want to freeze on you guys. So next slide, please. So our grant is really in three parts. It's a planning grant. And so the first part is hydrological monitoring, and that's led by RU. And they're assessing groundwater through wells and at springs at many points all around the Amargosa Basin. And they've been doing this for many years. And the purpose is to gain knowledge on um, hydrological knowledge. I think that the groundwater system is really the underpinning of this whole region, both for the people that live here and these awesome plants and animals that are found at these riparian sites and at these springs and at these marshes. And so Rue was working on that, and that's going to help with planning efforts in the area. And it gives us a baseline so that we can put future changes in context and hopefully maybe do something about changes that aren't really working in the favor of the people that live here and the animals and plants that live here. Next slide, please. Are you able to advance it? Yeah, there it goes. Okay. The next component is the riparian restoration planning component, and we'll talk about that more tonight. And that's led by American Bird Conservancy and River Partners. And we're really focused on the Amargosa River at Shoshone and south at Tecopa in the Amargosa Canyon and on Willow Creek at China Ranch. Next, please. And then the third component is led by UC Davis, and River Partners is working with UC Davis on this as well. And that is to create more marsh habitat for the endangered Amargosa vole. And the vole is only found on Tecopa Marsh, and so UC Davis is going to be working with the River Partners to come up with a plan to produce more habitat to help the voles exist into the future, giving projected changes in climate. Next, please. And so to bring it back to that riparian restoration planning component, so I wanted to start with like, what is riparian habitat? And so I went to the Fish and Wildlife Service, and they define riparian areas as plant communities that are contiguous to and affected by surface and subsurface hydrologic features. And those features, you can have perennial flow, like a lot of the Amargosa River and Willow Creek, or intermittent flow, such as at other parts of the Amargosa River. And you find riparian habitat around rivers and streams and lakes or drainage ways. So think about things like willows and cottonwoods. Here in this picture, this is Willow Creek downstream from China Ranch. And so I think there might be a little bit of willow in here, but it's mostly mesquite. And this is supported by subsurface flow and some surface flow on Willow Creek. So you can see it's kind of like a linear system that follows the groundwater here. Next. And so to give you some bullets on the value, why are we focused on this? What's the big deal? And so riparian habitats, especially in arid places in the Southwest, you have a lot of biodiversity that's crammed into a relatively small but very nutrient-rich area. And so just in California, over 225 species of birds and mammals and reptiles and amphibians depend on riparian habitats in our state. For birds, riparian ecosystems harbor the most diverse bird communities in the arid southwestern U.S. And that's both for nesting birds and as really important stopover sites during migration for a large number of bird species. And then the riparian vegetation itself is critical to the quality of in-stream habitat and aids significantly in maintaining aquatic life by providing shade and food and nutrients. And I'll get more into that in a second. Next. The thing is that everybody wants this water. So for me, being a bird person that's worked in riparian habitats my whole career in the Southwest, I've learned that we don't have a lot of riparian habitat out there. It's much of it's desert. And so riparian vegetation only makes up less than 0.5% of California's total land area. And so it didn't cover much in the first place. And of what was covered, we've eliminated a lot of it. And only now 2 to 15%, depending on where you are, of our historic riparian vegetation or habitat is still there. Next, please. And bringing it back to how riparian benefits things like birds and why this restoration project is important. This image is from the California Partisan Flight Riparian Bird Conservation Plan. And it's showing you all of the different sort of, I don't know, niches you could say, or the importance of structural diversity in riparian habitats to support good bird diversity. So here in this picture, the big tree is a cottonwood. So if you have cottonwood trees or big willows, you can have things like Swainson's hawks, or like at China Ranch, things like summer tanagers, or brown-crested flycatchers. Brown-crested flycatchers are big flycatchers, and they nest in the cavities that are created by woodpeckers. So you got to have big trees to have these big cavities to support brown-crested flycatchers. A lot of the birds that I work on, way more than I thought when I started doing this. Most birds out here nest between my knees and my neck. I'm 6'4". So you need a vibrant, thick, dense understory to support nesting habitat for a large number of birds, Bell's vireos or willow flycatchers or blue grosbeaks. And then you need important things in ground cover, such as rushes and cattails and grasses to support things like common yellowthroat or song sparrow. So we're hoping to produce as much structural diversity as we can for our birds to give them these opportunities to proliferate in the Amargosa system. Next, please. More on the benefits that we want this restoration project to provide for birds. So structural diversity, I just talked about that. Microclimate is a big one. So this is a very hot, dry place. And riparian habitat makes things, there's shade, it makes things cooler, and it keeps things moist and humid so that you have insects surviving late into the really hot June and July and August period so that these baby birds can teach themselves how to find food. So we are hoping to produce more of those conditions to help these birds, again, survive when it's some pretty tough conditions. And then again, on food, not just producing a microclimate that supports insects, but also just producing flowers and seeds that the flowers support insects that birds rely on, and then the seeds also support birds. So all of those things can help produce a vibrant avian community here. Next. And then I wanted to kind of finish talking about some of what are we working on? What species are we trying to help? And so the Amargosa, I've worked all over the Southwest. The Amargosa River is one of the most important, best, diverse riparian systems I've worked on in the Southwest. It's amazing. And so we have state endangered Bell's vireos that nest here, yellow warblers and yellow-breasted chats and summer tanagers are all riparian California bird species of concern. That really rely on these riparian habitats, and they're not found many other places around the Amargosa. Next, please. More species of special concern that are found nesting at the Amargosa. The crystal thrashers there on the left, and Lucy's warblers and loggerhead shrikes, and even long-eared owls. I found them nesting on the Amargosa in the past. Next. And then a really special thing about the Amargosa is that it's at the very edge of the geographic ranges of a number of species that we think of to be more associated with, like the Sonoran Desert or the Chihuahuan Desert to the southeast. So black-tailed gnatcatcher, verdins, those crystal thrashers, and the Lucy's warblers, you don't really find those northwest of the Amargosa in numbers. The Amargosa is kind of like the very edge of, where you can find these species in the Southwest. Next, please. And then for fish, so there are a number of endemic fish that are found in the region. In our project area, you can find things like Amargosa River pupfish and Amargosa speckled dace and Shoshone pupfish. And those are all species that are only found here. That are also on the species of special concern list that we aim to help with our restoration plan. Next. And I wanted to close it before I hand it off to Laurel to talk about how the Amargosa River, I've kind of mentioned how I think it's incredible and really diverse and amazing, but it's also an important source population. And by that, I mean that we've worked there for 20 years now, finding nests and monitoring them to see, how many eggs hatch and how many babies fledge for every single nest for all these pairs of birds. And I found that aside from brown-headed cowbirds, there are almost no nest predators at the Amargosa. It's kind of exceptional. There's no jays. There's very few rodents that eat nests. In 2022, I was out there monitoring nests, and every single nest survived. It was 100%, which is amazing. Like, you're lucky if you can get 30 or 40% nest success. You're thinking you're doing kind of all right, treading water, and 100% survived in 2022. And so as a result, we're producing well over 3.5 chicks that fledge for every nest attempt. So the Amargosa is producing way more baby birds than it can support. Those birds are going to other places, and we don't ban them. So I can't prove this because they don't know if there are birds. But what I can tell you is that the yellow dot there, that's the Amargosa. All those dots around it, those blue dots, those are other riparian sites where Bell's vireos have been found since the start of our project, when we've begun to have these really high productivity years following some cowbird management. So Afton Canyon to the south, and Ballarat near Surprise Canyon west of the Panamints to the west, and Beatty to the north in Nevada and Ash Meadows, Corn Creek and near Red Rocks to the east. Those are all sites where I suspect that at least some of our birds are ending up. So the value of this site as a source population to help regionally bird populations across the Eastern Mojave is a key thing to me, and one of the biggest reasons why we took on this project. And so with that, I think that's my last slide. I'll leave it up to Laurel to introduce River Partners and our process and to talk more about her work there.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's great to hear again how this place is so important to you, to us, to so many people, and definitely to these species. I mean, you've already talked a lot about these benefits, but just to kind of reiterate and even think broader too for river partners and for myself and a lot of the people working on this project. Riparian restoration is a passion for us and so important because it, as Chris was speaking to, supports so much biodiversity, especially in the Amargosa River. It really supports, climate resilience by giving a cooler microhabitat to so many of these species to survive through seasons and years. It supports, the vibrant communities like people that are here today. It's just a place that we love and appreciate. And then also really important for, water conservation and replenishment, especially, I have some projects, some places in agricultural areas where it's really important to have these free flowing rivers, recharging groundwater and supporting other systems downstream. And then, again, just really important for critical habitat for these species and connectivity. A lot of times these are, corridors for species to travel throughout counties or states or even the country along riverways. I wanted to say a little bit more about River Partners since we don't typically work in the Amargosa area, so it might be kind of a new nonprofit to you. We were founded in '98, so going on almost 30 years of River Partner, bringing life back to rivers, to benefit the environment and also people. We tend to work at larger scales. So we were founded by farmers and started initially working on restoration on agricultural land, which lended itself to large restoration projects at a time. So the restoration project that we're looking at for the Amargosa is just under 1,000 acres. And that's somewhat within River Partners' like typical size of projects. So we've restored about 20,000 acres over those 30 years. But you can see this map is from 2023, needs to be updated because this is our first time working actually in the Amargosa River Basin. We have people on staff that, like Chris, have spent a lot of time in their career on the Amargosa, but we haven't done a restoration project here yet. But we have throughout kind of the Imperial Valley and on the Colorado River and some similar kind of arid ecosystems. But I guess I also want to point out, in our name River Partners, we really value leaning on partner expertise, and I'm excited to be working on this project with Amargosa Conservancy and American Bird Conservancy and so many others that bring, decades of varied experience to this project. A little bit more on our typical approach and just an approach to restoration in general. Everything always starts, these planning projects start with site and species specific research and planning. So that's really the phase we're in right now, talking with partners, doing all this background research on the species and their needs, and as you'll see in the next slide, like the particulars of this area and what it needs. Our projects often, and that will include this project as well, include, funding and time for finding and collecting locally adapted seed and plants that we can then use in later restoration. So we'll be doing that over the next couple of years, making sure we find, species that are well adapted to this place. And then, like I said, we're founded by farmers. So sometimes in our projects, we try to find ways to really do things at scale and efficiently and really effectively, taking from some of our like agricultural backgrounds to plants at scale. That will probably be, it will have to be tailored to the Amargosa being more remote, and we won't be able to get a tractor down into the canyon or anything, but we will, like, whenever possible, try to provide supplemental water to really guarantee the success of initial establishment of these young baby plants in their first year or two. This is just one project example. I think another benefit of working in restoration or riparian areas is that they can, when given the opportunity, grow really quickly. This is at Cibola National Wildlife Refuge on the Colorado River. And if you look at the years, just between 2010 and 2011, we already had willows and mesquite and other species that were over 8 feet tall. And so these species can be really quickly adapted to finding water, tapping into groundwater, and growing really quickly, and then providing all of the benefits that, to species that Chris was just talking about. So it's a satisfying type of work, and something that we're always aiming to do. And that last photo has coyotes and badgers in the same picture, just a decade later using this habitat that was created. So something that we're kind of aiming to replicate here, although it's a different system, and we'll need different considerations. And so these are some of our considerations really for any project, and every project needs us to look at different details. But I just wanted to kind of give a little bit of a background of the restoration planning mindset when we get grants like this supported by the Wildlife Conservation Board. These are some of the initial things we'll look at. So for example, the land designation and site access. Here we have a lot of BLM land, also some state land and private land. And some of that land comes with different designations like wilderness designation, which kind of limits if you can bring in equipment, or and just generally there will be different levels of access we have to different sites. So starts our brains churning around the logistics of like, where can we get a water truck, or where can we deliver 1,000 plants at a time? So we're kind of analyzing that right now, and also looking similarly at irrigation and water availability. Whenever possible, we really try to irrigate plants for their first year in these harsh climates, so that when we invest in a plant and we grow it out for a year or two, it has a really high chance of survival. In some of the remote areas of the canyon, though, we probably will have to just site plants near the river where we know there's good access to groundwater, and wish them luck, because we're not going to be able to get a water truck 7 miles down into the canyon. Or potentially we'll also be looking at some hand watering and stuff when we can. Similarly with water, definitely considering hydrology, as I kind of said, like, where is it naturally flowing, where is it wet, where are plants going to thrive on establishment and well into the future. We're also looking at soil and water characteristics. So for this area, for example, wanting to look at soil salinity and texture. A lot of these plants are adapted to some soil salinity, which is great, because there are some some salty conditions in the canyon, and it kind of gets saltier as you go down. But we'll be looking more at in depth of like, how quickly does that salt accumulate as you go down the canyon, for example, and at what point do certain species kind of drop out from our available plants. Like there are some plants like we don't really see as many willows and cottonwoods low down into the Amargosa Canyon, because it's probably a little bit too salty for them until fresher water comes in from Willow Creek. And then definitely I have more of a plant background. Of vegetation here is essential, the foundation of our habitat we're creating. So we're doing some mapping via drones and hiking the canyon to map out, where are there invasive plant issues, where are native plants, and where are they doing well, to kind of learn from that. And then, of course, as Chris was speaking to, definitely are considering our target wildlife and what they need, like the structural diversity of plants for different birds. And I think we'll be, the last point here was like, we'll be also analyzing, climate resilience. How is this landscape predicted to change in the future? And even without knowing exactly how it's going to change, or when there might be a big flood coming in, we can hopefully, by considering all these other issues, create a really healthy, resilient system that is better able to bounce back after any disturbance in the future. I wanted to highlight a few prior restoration projects, actually, because we are always learning from what we've done in the past, and partners, including Amargosa Conservancy and others, have done a lot of work already here and are able to bring that expertise forward. And so one type of work that's going to be a big element of this planning grant and future restoration is continuing to manage tamarisk. And so tamarisk is a non-native plant, a non-native tree that can kind of take over areas, exclude native vegetation, and it also excretes a lot of salt from its leaves and makes the soil surface very salty, and sometimes the water salty, and can impede other native plants from growing there. So that's why one major reason we, are likely to take it out and to continue to manage it in spots in our future restoration projects. And these are some pictures from past restoration projects. So we already, have a lot to learn from. Some of these pictures are from at least the kind of one on the left and bottom are from the 2006-2007 era of projects, where about 200 acres of tamarisk were treated on public and private land using a combination of heavy equipment like the excavator there and chainsaws. And then the blue picture is showing cut stump herbicide application. So really targeted application of herbicides right at the kind of growth layer of a tree so that it prevents resprouting from the roots of the tamarisk. And then importantly, this project in the past also included resprouting or treating resprouts. So if you look at the bottom picture, I guess I have a cursor, I could probably show you it. The bottom picture here in the lighter green is our tamarisk resprouts. And so they can come back really quickly, either via seed or by the roots. But if you get them earlier, first year or two after they're growing back, it's a lot easier than, 10 years later when they're a big established tree again. And then, these projects have happened throughout the canyon and kind of continue to happen, and will be looped into our future restoration projects. I think the kind of difference with this planning grant is that it's at a scale that allows us to really plan comprehensively across the canyon all at once, figuring out like how future partners will be engaged, what areas we want to target and when and how, all at once. So we'll hopefully just be able to put a lot of brain power to planning out future restoration actions like this. And then I guess this last bullet point is pointing out that even in the next couple of weeks, they're in some of these areas that they've treated in the past, BLM and Shoshone Village and Living Desert Museum and other partners are planting mesquite this fall. So again, pairing taking out invasive vegetation and planting native vegetation. Then the other project example I wanted to highlight was what's called the Big Fix at Borehole Spring. And a little bit different, we've mostly been talking about riparian, like woody tree vegetation, but also, as Chris said, like these groundwater fed systems near waterways are also kind of looped into our riparian planting. So we will be looking at ways to enhance marsh habitat as well. And Borehole Spring, if you're familiar with it, is the largest population of Amargosa vole, the largest habitat for them. And there were some problems in the early 2000s, around 2005, 2009, where a culvert modification under this road that's right below the marsh started to drop the water level, and the marsh dried out quite significantly, and it was only really left with an active marsh right along this kind of channel. And so partners came together a few years later, around 2016, to fix that culvert, bring up the water levels, and then also removed a bunch of thatch. So removed old bulrush litter from the surface that was just so thickly accumulated that it was kind of keeping bulrush from recruiting again and growing back. So by doing both at the same time, raising the water level and clearing the vegetation, they saw a 500% increase in bulrush density in that first year in a lot of that marsh. So really successful. And they also saw voles returning that same year before they planned to do reintroductions of the vole. So I thought that was also a cool example of just first how essential water is to this area. It really dictates the vegetation that's growing and where it's growing. And also how fast some of these species can respond to, an uplift of their habitat, returning this marsh, and then voles started to come back from across the road pretty much right away. That picture on the bottom kind of shows you the scale of how much vegetation was removed by hand with rakes. So a lot of good hard labor put into that project. Turning back to kind of our future endeavors here in the Amargosa, we've been working with all our partners that are all part of this grant to really summarize our main goals for the project. So here are kind of the 4 goals as summarized. And then for each goal, we have sub objectives, but these are really like our 4 leading objectives. So the first is to restore diverse riparian, wetland, and upland vegetation along Amargosa River and Willow Creek. So both of those waterways are included in the project area. And again, kind of the essential bedrock of the habitat, restoring that vegetation and taking out non-native vegetation. And then moving up the food chain from there, we're aiming to increase wildlife biodiversity and abundance with a focus on special status and endemic wildlife species, since there are so many special status and endemic wildlife species to this area, and we really want to make sure they're kind of at the center of our restoration planning. And then we have 2 more human-centered goals. One is to support recreational access to the Mojave Desert, riparian habitats for both residents and visitors, providing opportunities for people to connect and support this landscape. And so in some of our planning efforts, we'll just be looking at like recommendations and ways to kind of improve the recreational access into the future. And then also we want to provide opportunities for community participation in planning now and also ongoing stewardship in the future. So, webinars like this, I hope help start to support that. We want community input, and we also want, community buy-in in the actual restoration and ongoing stewardship of this landscape. And to give a little bit more detail on, it's important for us to, when we're outlining these goals, to also, and the objectives that fall under that, is to think about how are we actually going to measure that. So we're really aiming for kind of measurable objectives that we can track and say, we did a good job at the end of the day. We know it's not just the good feeling, but like we can come back and look at and see how, birds are responding or fish are responding. So for some examples, these are some things that we'll be looking specifically to improve and track over time. So looking at for that first goal, kind of native vegetation cover and diversity, as well as non-native cover. So we'll be, for example, mapping the current cover of tamarisk and if we can reduce that overall. And also tracking plant survival. So of the plants that we plant, where, like, how many of them are surviving and where that will help inform future restoration too. For birds, we'll be tracking territorial density, and also as we were talking about earlier, the structural diversity of trees. So not just if they're native or not, but what is their shape, their size, their height, and how does that kind of relate to what birds need. And also native fish abundance. We have partners that have been tracking these fish for decades and will continue to do so, hopefully, and we'll be able to see how these populations are responding over time. And then for the community-centered goals, kind of tracking trail use or community engagement. I think, all these goals kind of fit back to I guess in the title of the grant, it's enhancing biodiversity and climate resilience. So really all of these goals are trying to tie back to that, supporting biodiversity of this landscape. And then by supporting a healthier ecosystem, we're also supporting a more resilient ecosystem that can, support these species in varied conditions and, in the face of any disturbances in the future or challenges in the future. I wanted to give a little more detail for people that are like science-minded. These are some of the ways that we're breaking it down further and how we're going to track that success. So we're doing something called before-after control impact, or BACI monitoring. And it's pretty simple. It's just, intuitively, we could imagine if you want to track your success, you think about, okay, what did it look like before and what did it look like after? So that's kind of before and after. We'll be doing the before monitoring over the next 2 years to get that kind of baseline data set. But something that's sometimes left out, but we find to be relatively important, is to also look at a reference or control site. So we'll be identifying areas within Amargosa Canyon or similar ecosystems that we think are healthy or are our kind of goal, and see how those do over the same time scale. So for example, like these graphs on the bottom kind of help show us like, okay, before and after is the reference site and our site, like, are birds increasing everywhere? Are they only increasing on our site because we did a great job for this restoration project? Another example is, we've had, unfortunately, screwbean mesquite die-offs in the region. And so if we had planted a bunch of screwbean and saw that they all died in a restoration project and didn't have any sort of like frame of reference for the larger landscape, we might think, oh, like we did something wrong in planting them, or for some reason these plants died. But we can see, unfortunately, in the larger landscape that there is this broader threat, and so screwbean mesquites have had die-offs like across the region. So that's just, the importance of doing this monitoring before, so we can, inform future restoration too. And with that, we're starting to kind of wrap up and look towards the next steps here. So my team is going in just a week and a half. The beginning of November, we'll be out there for a little over a week to do some of that really important kind of background investigation of the area. So looking at soils and water, looking at tamarisk extent in the canyon, also doing initial seed scouting and seeing, where are we going to collect or even starting to collect seeds in the canyon to help future restoration, and generally being out on the lookout for other like issues or things that we could address, like erosion or other things that we run into. Then, really ongoing, we're doing a lot of restoration general research, talking with partners to identify our restoration priorities and areas. As all this information and knowledge is coming together, we're really working to figure out exactly what are we doing where, start to put it on a map, and hopefully we'll be able to share that out with the public soon. Look into next year to start to put together a more concrete plan. And that'll also, inform where are we getting permits, for what actions, and who's providing permits for various things. We're working on BLM land, we have to go through NEPA, or different permitting pathways to kind of make sure our project is benefiting the environment. Next year, and look out for announcements in around April. We're looking to do a town hall, so we'll probably be presenting on more of the progress that we've made over the last year. And yeah, otherwise, like I said, we're going to continue to be doing this before after control impact monitoring, continuing to do seed scouting and collection, and working with partners, hearing from the public, offering webinars like this for questions and answers or feedback. And then the grant will close in early 2028. So we still have a few years ahead of us to really dig into this and come up with a great plan for enhancing the Amargosa River and Willow Creek. I think with that, I just wanted to share a few more partners. We shared, there's a lot of partners already that are directly tied to this grant and, working on the restoration plan or various elements. And then we also have a lot of people, like various public agencies, that are helping us, are sitting on advisory panels, advising us on permitting pathways, and some really important landowners in the area, like Shoshone Village and China Ranch State Farm, that are actually in the project area, in addition to BLM land. And then the Timbisha Shoshone tribe as well has been really supportive of this project and giving us starting to give us good input as well. So I think with that, our emails are listed, and we can probably open it up for questions. Our emails, if you have any great ideas for the canyon, questions in the future, you can probably also find us through Amargosa Conservancy too.
Awesome. Well, I certainly just learned a ton in the last 45 minutes. I'm sure everyone else did too. Before we get to fielding questions, I'm just going to put one quick plug in for staying connected with us on all of this. So I'm just dropping in the chat a link to, if you're interested in this project and how it's taking shape and developing, this is going to be an exciting couple of years. And we, as Amargosa Conservancy especially, but all these partners, are going to do everything we can to keep the public and members really informed on how these plans are taking shape, and opportunities for you to provide input. So the best way to do that is to subscribe, for one, to our organization's newsletter. It's once a month, but it is an up-to-date, living update on all of these project actions. And then I just dropped the Instagram accounts for each of our organizations. If you're on Instagram, give us a follow, because we're going to be posting about this project, and others like it as well. So please do us that solid. But with no further ado, I guess let's take some questions. And if you have other questions too, please go ahead and still drop them in the chat, and we'll take them as they come in. But I've got a handful of questions here. I think some of which you all can answer, some of which I can probably answer a little better. And I'm going to just take them in the order that they came in. So there was a question early on about, is there any suitable habitat for the voles in ash meadows? It's a really interesting question with an interesting history attached to it. So there actually was a species of vole endemic to ash meadows called the ash meadows montane vole. And ash meadows is interesting because it's really at the southernmost boundary of the Great Basin Desert, really where the Great Basin and Mojave deserts meet. And so we actually had a distinct species of vole in ash meadows whose nearest genetic relative was not the Amargosa vole, as you would expect, but actually the Paranagit Valley vole in eastern Nevada. And so the ash meadows vole is not officially labeled as extinct, but it was last observed in 1933. There have been studies since then, or surveys since then, capture efforts to try to capture a vole to see if there's any population left there. Those have not been successful. And so we can pretty reasonably assume that all the habitat modifications in ash meadows, during especially the mid part of the 20th century, probably led to its extinction. In terms of whether ash meadows could be a site for voles in the future, there are very quiet conversations around this happening. It's divisive though, right? It's not necessarily native to that place. It's there are bulrush and similar, spring and wetland habitat characteristics, but ash meadows is a different in kind landscape than the lower part of the river down by Tacopa. So I guess my feeling is if we're really thinking that there's, we're taking one last shot at keeping that species from going extinct, is ash meadows a potential restoration opportunity? Maybe, but again, they're kind of not native to that place to begin with. So again, it's an interesting question, and thanks for humoring that historical aside. I'll answer the other remaining vole question first, actually, as well. There's a question around mortality to seedlings due to vole activity. Again, I'm not a vole biologist. We're actually hoping to have partners from UC Davis and California Department of Fish and Wildlife do a vole specific presentation as part of this grant. So stay tuned for that. But what I will say, based on my understanding of the species, their primary diet is almost exclusively Olney's 3-square bulrush. For a long time, it was believed that they only consumed bulrush. Because of the work that UC Davis has done in establishing a captive colony of voles as a lifeboat population, they found that actually voles can't really thrive only on bulrush. They're opportunists, as is kind of every desert species. And so during years of high plant diversity, they find that voles will consume sedges and other grasses in the area as part of their diet, and they probably need a certain amount of that. But I don't think there's probably serious concerns about seedling mortality, just because if we get to the point where we're concerned about the voles consuming too much, then like the vole has rebounded in a way that all of us would absolutely celebrate. This species is almost winked out of existence a dozen times in the last couple of decades. So I don't think it's a serious concern from a restoration perspective, but an interesting question. Let me throw one now to Laurel and Chris to field. And it's kind of just around sort of like our current situation with the government shutdown and BLM. How is the shutdown affecting this work, particular to this project? Do you have any concerns at this point about that timeline and the milestones we're trying to hit to get this done?
I'd say at this point, no. I mean, we've had really great participation from BLM and other partners, and other federal partners that, they haven't been able to make meetings in the last couple weeks, but assuming the government it was reopened sooner than later. We certainly have enough to keep us busy for now, and we're all the people primarily working on the planning are nonprofit partners and state partners, so we're able to continue work. As for the plant specific question, I don't actually know like the planting that's happening kind of outside of this direct grant, but related to this work, it's happening in a few weeks. As far as I can tell, they're still they still have their funding to proceed with the planting with the government shutdown. I don't know that that's being canceled. But I don't know if Chris or Mason have any other answers for that.
Yeah, I would add that a number of staff from the BLM and the Fish and Wildlife Service and NRCS, they're helping. They advise us and they provide good recommendations and suggestions on like what we need, timelines for permitting, all that stuff. And so they're all very busy because they're short-staffed and when they come back from the shutdown, they're going to be really busy. And so just to say that all the time they spend helping us is duly noted and appreciated, and I imagine that time is going to be even more constrained due to things like the shutdown. So we deal with things like that. I would guess that if when it comes to working on federal permitting, there might be less time for staff to work on our applications. I'm guessing, I don't really know, but I wouldn't be surprised if that were to happen. So we think about things like that. But it's hard to see. It's pretty muddy water right now. So we just keep this ongoing, something we deal with all the time.
Yeah, I would just echo that. I mean, just in normal open operations times, we're already so grateful for the time we get from the agencies because they are short-staffed and dealing with a ton of other issues all at once. And so the shutdown certainly isn't helping with that. And there's a worry that the backlog is gonna add up as the longer the shutdown drags on. So, but in terms of that, thankfully, this is a long-ranging, multi-year planning process, and we can keep doing our thing while the agencies are unable to really participate. And once things are reopened, we'll get them back up to speed, and that's kind of in part the relationship between us as nonprofit partners and the government is we can continue the work forward, kind of regardless of those national circumstances, which is a huge advantage. A couple other questions that have come in. So, and I can help field this one too, if you'd like, but there's a question around the project area. Was this originally degraded because of water diversions? And I'm just curious if either of you have looked into that specifically in this early stage of the planning for, especially for the riparian.
Not that I'm aware of. Every week I learn a new thing about the history of the system. So I might not be aware of something. But when I think about the things affecting the system, water diversion isn't something that I've traditionally been worried about or thought about happening in the past. But I don't know everything about this. I've been there for 20 years and I still learn things. I don't know. There might be something I don't know about.
Yeah, and I would just add, it's less in this case. You're looking at the project area, especially the Amargosa Canyon, Tacoma, Shoshone. It's certainly probably less concern over water diversion. Certainly, there have been changes to the system based on groundwater pumping, right? Just the use of domestic wells, even the commercial operations with the hot springs, and that's not a value judgment. It's just to say that that pumping is going to have an effect on the system, right? And so in some ways, you look at Tacoma in that area, and certainly the hydrology is different now than it would have been 100 years ago prior to it being kind of permanently settled, so to speak. So it certainly is something that is relevant. And that's why the work that Rue Inc. and those hydrologists are doing is so vital, because they're able to actually give us a better sense of how over time those pumping stresses may ultimately affect really important habitat areas connected to them. So it's all that. I think that's in part why we designed the grant in this fashion, so that we can see those longer ranging implications of existing and maybe projected use of groundwater in the region. And of course, it's far more relevant, I'd say, almost on the Nevada side of the basin, just because the population density and number of uses and pressures are far greater. But it's still certainly relevant in California as well.
Yeah, that's a nice point. I started working in the region in the eastern Sierra Nevada. So when I think of water diversion, I think of a big aqueduct that cuts off all the streams and makes the water go that way. There's other kinds of water diversion, and I appreciate that.
Mhm. And there's certainly, there's some, I have similar thoughts to Chris. Like I have projects in the Central Valley where the water is all piped all sorts of ways, but there are historic changes. Like there's the TNT Railroad, and you can see it going through the canyon in some spots. It's kind of capturing more spring water that's coming off the hills, and we're assuming it's kind of seeping under there, but it's alterations like that have altered the natural flow. And we are also looking at not diversions, but other kind of geomorphology changes that have been made, like culverts under the rail or under the highway, for example, are a little undersized and hard for the water to flow through. We're also looping that into our planning effort of like, are there other changes that we could make to allow the water to flow a little more naturally through there. So yeah, not that there's specific diversions, but there's more minor alterations that have been done over time.
Well, I'll just add too, one factor we've been looking at especially in the Tecopa locality is, we're seeing this kind of new regime in the Mojave Desert with intense droughts punctuated by strong, heavy precipitation events. If you've been paying attention to places like Joshua Tree and Death Valley in recent years, we've had massive road closures for months because these floods are just wiping them out. And we're seeing that in the Amargosa as well. We actually have gone out on a private property to see where head cutting is occurring. We're actually seeing erosion patterns change because of these flood events and how they're recontouring, the geomorphology, as Laurel mentioned. All of that is, this is what makes restoration so complicated, is we're trying to consider all of these factors in a changing landscape and anticipate how climate change is going to present new problems or exacerbate existing ones. So it's always top of mind is, the life is only going to thrive where there's water. And that's the key to all of this restoration work. Two more questions just popped in. One is, what is the plan for Crystal Reservoir? Good question, Marlene. I can field this one. So, we've been aware for the last few years that the Fish and Wildlife Service at Ash Meadows has been interested in essentially decommissioning or draining Crystal Reservoir. And the goal has been with that to, the reservoir, as the name implies, is a non-natural feature. It's an impeded part of the flow that historically would have flowed into Lower Carson Slough, which is another really interesting alkali wetland habitat area, kind of spanning that California-Nevada divide. And so ultimately it was just decided that this was probably worth restoring some of that historical traditional flow into the Lower Carson Slough to support that habitat. And I understand and appreciate it's unfortunate in some ways. So Crystal Reservoir has been there for a long time. It's certainly a local favorite in terms of, can't do it anymore. People used to water ski on Crystal Reservoir, but a really great birding spot too. So I think that's the hard thing in this is we're losing certain values in the reservoir, no longer being in the state that it was previously. But I guess the hope is we're offsetting that with some better habitat outcomes downstream. So yeah, we appreciate the complexity in that as well. And I'll just say to Alyssa, yes, we work with volunteers. I think all of our organizations do. They're kind of the heart and soul of my organization, to be honest. And so if you're looking to get involved in any of this work, we're hoping we will have opportunities to get volunteers out and really help us on the ground. So follow up with any of us directly via email. We'd be happy to plug you in as we can. All right. Hey, with that, I'm not seeing any other questions. But sorry, Laurel, I didn't mean to jump in. Did you have something there?
Yeah, no, I was wondering if I was just trying to catch up on the chat and if we answered the chipping questions and stuff, but it looks like Mason, you might have answered this. So.
I did, but if you want to speak to that too, is that something your organization has done or could be part of, actual tamarisk removal as part of implementation? And maybe it's too early to tell, but it's something that I think we've thought about just given the remote nature of the landscape and how hard it is to physically remove this material once it's cut.
Yeah, I do think it's going to be challenging for this project in that it is so remote and there's not, a road into the canyon, for example. I think there's areas within this project that are near highways and we can can get excavators in and chippers in. Unfortunately, those are the areas that have had more treatment over time as well, so maybe need a little less attention, although ongoing management's always important. So I guess, yeah, we're still looking into it if there is a way. There are some really older roads, maybe we can get a chipper to drive in. I was like, I wonder how much it would cost to get a helicopter, but I don't think that's probably not the most practical option. Otherwise, we've talked a little bit with BLM about dusting off some old hopes to get a burn management plan together in this region, so that maybe we could burn some of the cut materials instead. But that also needs to be, discussed more with them, and pretty major work would need to be put into that burn plan as well. But that's, what we're here to do. And then I think I didn't show it at the very beginning, but I saw there was a size question. We have probably more photos we could share, but I think this is somewhat representative of the size. And maybe Mason, you could jump into if you remember, if you've been around with some of these particular chipping projects, but it's pretty big material still. I mean, we do see, I don't know in this particular patch if any of those are resprouting from nodes in the chipping and just, emphasizing the need to retreat, or if those are all coming from kind of rootstocks underground there. But it's relatively big chipping material still.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say like the role of volunteers here too. I mean, we had a recent burn at China Ranch in Willow Creek a few years ago. And of course, whenever you get a burn disturbance like that, it's conditions are ripe for tamarisk to come in, and they can very quickly become established and take over. Thankfully, volunteers have helped, like just by hand pruning those sprouts, have really helped keep that tamarisk very much in check. And so it just goes to show that proactive management like that can make a huge difference. So certainly something that we rely on to do this work and make it sustainable too.
Mhm.
But with that, I don't see any other questions. Just want to thank everyone for hanging out with us tonight. And you could be doing anything else on a Thursday night. We're so glad you're here. But stay tuned. This is going to be an exciting project when it comes together. And thank you again to our members and our partners and everyone who's just making this possible. This is the stuff that we all dream of getting to do, and we're getting to do it. So thank you again to the Wildlife Conservation Board. And with that, I'll just say good night to everyone. And we hope to see you at the next webinar.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for hosting.
Yeah, thank you, Mason. Thanks for Amargosa Conservancy organizing this. And it's just good to be part of it and good to see you. So thanks for doing this.
Likewise, I'm having fun.
All right.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Yeah, have a good evening.